this episode of Peephole Pictures, we're looking at Dracula Sucks from 1978.
If you think you've experienced every Dracula, you're dead wrong. This time, the Count is not just going for throats.
I am Dracula. I bid you welcome.
Master, I'm here!
To die. To be really dead. That must be glory. There are far worse things awaiting man than death.
You will have a little shot in the arm, cocaine. Oh, around my brain.
Count Dracula? Professor Van Helsing.
My pleasure.
Van Helsing. We know the name even in Transylvania.
You're most kind, Count.
I'm recording this episode at nighttime, which is the perfect atmosphere to talk about a film like this. You look outside and it's just totally blackout, man. All you hear are the sounds of the bugs hanging out, the wind occasionally blowing through the trees, shaking the leaves, and the endless possibilities of mysterious forces in the night just lurking about around every corner. And we're going to be talking about the most nocturnal creature of them all, Count Dracula. That's right, we're going to be talking about Dracula Sucks as well as the alternate version, Lust at First Bite. Now, to say up front, there is an R-rated version of this film, and I have not seen it, but from what I have read, it is apparently just the Dracula Sucks version with the hardcore sex cut out. Now, you may be thinking to yourself that the Dracula Sucks and Lust at First Bite versions don't really differ all that much, maybe some alternate takes or alternate shots, and you would be incorrect for the most part, but we will get into that. Now, the history of the release of this is a little tricky. I will say that I did not listen to the commentary on the Peekorama 4K, and this is not a review of the 4K. That's just how I watched it. But the Dracula Sucks version, which according to one review online said it was rarely seen, comes in at an hour 34 minutes, while Lust at First Bite, which is a different version of the film, comes in at an hour and 14 minutes. Now, the thing with Dracula Sucks is that from what I read, or at least from what I could find, I don't know how true any of this is or not, so you gotta take this with a grain of salt, that Dracula Sucks is more of the director's cut than anything else, and it was released in Britain, but the thing is, I don't know if it was this version or Lust at First Bite that was widely seen in America, because originally, the intention with the film was to release an R-rated version of the film, which, according to what I read, was the Dracula Sucks version without the hardcore sex, and then a year later release the hardcore version into the market, the X version. Now, whether or not that was just Dracula Sucks with the full uncut sex, or if it was the Lust at First Bite version, I am not sure. I looked a little bit into it, but ultimately didn't really find many conclusions, but I also did not research that in depth, so I guess that is my own fault on that. But it's ultimately not important. We're going to be talking about both versions of the film nonetheless. So, Dracula Sucks, we'll talk about this version first. Directed by Phillip Marshak. Now, interestingly enough, it's completely coincidental, we talked about Phillip Marshak on the last episode when we talked about Intimate Lessons from 1982. And again, he didn't do a whole lot of films, but he did do this. Another film which I want to write down that his son talked about was Lust Flight 2000 from 1978, which I want to make a note of because that could be talked about on the show at some point. There are many, many films to talk about, so it's never ending the amount of discoveries to come across. But so this was directed by Phillip Marshak. Now this has 5 writing credits, not counting, of course, Bram Stoker, the original novel of Dracula. which is public domain now at this point. It is interesting that in one of the features on this, when you had Darryl Marshak and Bill Margold go back to the original castle of it, well, as close as they could get, it was barbed wire off. He said that his father had gotten the rights to it. Now, I don't know if he means he had gotten the rights to tell the story, which is public domain, or if he got some other specific copyright to it that I am unaware of, but that's what he said. But now Darryl Marshak and David Kern are credited directly as screenwriters off of IMDb. Bill Margold and Mitch Morrill are credited with additional scenes, and then T. Bell is credited with additional dialogue. So we have a lot of hands in the pot on this, and what does that come out to? What kind of film does it work out when you have 6 different forces working behind it? Well, the film itself is a loose, more so a loose version of the 1931 Todd Browning film, more so than it is the novel. I mean, the novel itself has been adapted many times in many different fashions. The novel itself doesn't completely lend itself to a film version the way that it is primarily done through journal entries through the various characters. So the film versions themselves were able to take some liberties. And actually, as a somewhat on topic, somewhat off topic, I would recommend for film fans to watch the video put out by Cinemassacre, which compares a handful of the Dracula adaptations to see which one is the most faithful to the novel. And I won't give it away, but it's a very, very fascinating video. And let me tell you, that Dracula Sucks was not in the running, but I imagine that it probably wasn't very faithful. Now, it's been a little while since I've seen the 31 film, but certain things about this kind of directly mirror it in terms of thematic points, more so than just adapting it directly the same from a novel. Because you can have a film, you can have 2 different films adapted from the same novel. I mean, look at like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, for an example. Looks like, yeah, you're getting the same plot points because those were plot points from the novel, but both films in that case were doing things in their own way enough to make them stand on their own as different films. Ultimately different films with a lot of comparisons. So, but a lot of the points in this, like I said before, were lifted more so from the Todd Browning film, because you have Richard Bulik, who is playing Renfield in this, and his performance is directly inspired by Dwight Fry's in the original. The way he goes about the intonation of his voice, going in the dialect, go rats, the way that he said it in that film. And even some of the framing in this wasn't exactly identical, but it had to be intentional. I'd be super surprised if it really wasn't. In the Dracula Sucks version of it, there's one sequence early on when Renfield is looking up from the bottom of the stairs, which practically mirrors the scene early on in Todd Browning's film when Dwight Fry is at the bottom of the stairs on the ship, looking up at the Englishman. On that, the location itself is. Oh, there I go, drop my pen. How professional of me? What did I say? Have I? Good lord, I've been up all day, guys. But the location of this film is absolutely wonderful. This was shot in Lake Hughes, California, in the desert, and in the location as a special feature on I suppose originally on the DVD, because the copyright on it was 2011 or 14, or I forgot when it was, because Vinegar Syndrome had put this out on DVD many years ago. This was one of the big kind of adult titles that they put out, and it had, I think, both versions of it on there. I never actually bought the DVD. Actually, funnily enough, I almost bought the DVD before I was going to buy this. Well, because I was going to buy that, and then the 4K got announced a little while ago, so I said, okay, I'm going to get on that 4K and watch this. But it all looks great. It's funny, when I was talking about last time with Intimate Lessons, I was talking about how the location in that film was also really solid, mansion kind of setting, and however, I don't know how much all of that was shot there, but to my knowledge, all of it was shot here. Now, the only times where I did perhaps question whether it was on location or not, I didn't find anything that said otherwise, was in the quote-unquote sanitarium. When they're passing by, they have some of the characters who are mentally ill, and whether intentionally or not, I mean, it looks like it was shot in a barn. I mean, the characters, and actually they return to that later in the film when Paul Thomas, who's playing Jonathan Harker, ends up in a situation there. But I mean, there's like a bunch of like hay around and stuff, and I don't know if that was a location issue where they couldn't just film it in. I don't, maybe not necessarily a sanitarium, but at least something more closer to the mansion. I'm really not sure, man, what the deal with that was. That seemed unless I missed some sort of dialogue there, I really don't know. But it all looks great. Set design as well is really, really outstanding. There are some great sequences underground in Dracula's kind of lair, and it's a small kind of setting, but they really make the most of it. The lighting in that is absolutely wonderful. The set design, like the coffins look great. The fog that's going through the air. I mean, this film looks gorgeous, man, in those sequences. Those are the strongest looking sequences, because a lot of the rest of it looks as though it's shot in that mansion, which I assume that the interiors were shot there. They said that they were there for 7 days, so I was just that's just an assumption, man. Those were all interiors there, but it all looks great. But it's a standard kind of living room setting when they're walking around the mansion. They use the living room a lot. It's very bourgeois sort of interiors, and it all looks really good, man. I mean, that goes without saying. It all looks good, but those sequences in the underground look great. And when they have the interior sanitarium sequences with John Leslie, I mean, those look like they were probably filmed in the mansion as well. I mean, those looked more kind of like a standard kind of home office. When I say standard home office, I mean for a mansion. I mean, there's nice windows on the wall. I mean, it's a big open area, but it just looks like a little more cramped in than he were to do a traditional kind of office setting. So I'm really not sure if that was. I mean, presumably it was filmed inside. I filmed in the inside the castle. I'm not totally sure. But when talking about the set design with the lighting as well, I mean, what I'm talking about before with the connection to the Todd Browning film is you have really, really wonderful close-ups in that of Bela Lugosi's face, which Jamie Gillis is directly. I mean, when you have Richard Bulik doing directly a Dwight Fry impersonation, I mean, Jamie Gillis is very openly doing a Bela Lugosi impression. And it's funny because Bela Lugosi is one of these actors, specifically in Dracula, that's been parodied to death. I mean, everybody can do, when you think of Dracula, if somebody says, like, do a voice like Dracula, people automatically do Bela Lugosi. But here, the way that Gillis does it, I mean, as an actor, man, Gillis really is, I think, one of the strongest. And I've said it before, but I seriously think his range as a performer has always been undervalued because everything else kind of got in the way, where people know him for whatever other reasons, throughout his career. But as an actor, the more I see of his work and just see these performances, I'm really like taken aback. I mean, his performance as Dracula is really solid in this. He's not playing it up for the camera. I mean, the tone of this is fairly light for the most part, which I'll get into in a little bit. The tone is a little uneven. But because this is a little lighter for the most part, it'd be very easy for him to kind of fall into a comical kind of big performance. And it's really not that. He plays it pretty solidly to a point where I think if you were just making a straight kind of theatrical Dracula film, I think he'd be pretty solid at it. I mean, he does have this real gnarly beard, and I mean gnarly in a positive way. He has a great looking beard, so he's got his own kind of unique, distinct look to him, because not too often you see Dracula with a beard or any kind of facial hair. I mean, Bela Lugosi himself in that role is very clean cut. Very kind of pale white face, but it's solid, man. And his introduction, it's funny to look at the introduction between It's easy to look at his introduction in this between this and Lust at First Bite because he has a great introduction, this build up, and then he's there. It doesn't waste too much time, but it's like, wow, man, the lighting of it, the fog, it all builds to a really solid introduction here. He's really great in the film, but unfortunately, I just feel like he's not in the film enough. He's in large portions of the film, but then there's like a middle section where he's really kind of out of it. Not just because there are elongated sex scenes, but more so that I'm watching it kind of going like, I don't even know where this character is at right now. And then you could say like, okay, well, it's the daytime, so maybe he's sleeping, and I guess I get that, but then later on in the film, it's sort of like, okay, well, he's not always sleeping during the day, so I kind of wanted to be more focused on him. But with that said, you have a really, really great cast with this, man. You have like just front to back, of course, Jamie Gillis, John Leslie. Now, interestingly enough, so this is listed as Seka's first film, but she says it's not. Now, I was trying to find an interview that quoted this, but the link to it was dead. It says that it's not her first movie, but it's one of her first features. Now, I don't know what that means, and I really couldn't tell you. I don't know what, but either way, I guess this is one of the earliest performances from Seka. And she's very good in the film as well. She doesn't have a big part, but she has some good parts in this. But you have Serena in the film. I was talking about last time. You have Kay Parker and Paul Thomas are both back this time playing. I think. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was, Kay Parker and Paul Thomas are in this, but Kay Parker and John Leslie are playing brother and sister. Annette Haven, John Holmes. And John Holmes has a peculiar role in this film. I don't know what they were going for with this, because early on, he's getting, like, scolded, man. He's like, I'm going to teach, it was Irene Best. I'm sorry, no, it wasn't Irene Best. It was, Pat Manning. That's right. Pat Manning, who plays Irene, which throws you off. She's playing Irene Renfield. Then you have Irene Best playing like the maid of the film or one of the workers. I don't know. But anyway, so he's like mad. And then for no real reason at all, he just goes and like aggressively, like, I mean aggressively in Lust at First Bite, but in here he just sexually assaults her in a bizarre sequence where it's like, what are we going for here? What is this tone? He's got an apple in his hand, he crushes the apple, and if you guys think Good Will Hunting, he goes, how do you like them apples? What are we doing here, man? This is so bizarre to put this in this film, because the tone of it, for the most part, is fairly light. I mean, but then you have some sequences that are more aggressive. You have like a sequence with Paul Thomas, and it's just very aggressive and sexual, and it's like, what are we doing here, man? It's wild as all hell. It's just like, I guess that's what happens when you have 5 different writers on this. You kind of have different tones and different ways you're going for. I mean, it's never like completely mean-spirited, but it just has those moments. And then you have this incest, it's not even really a subplot, it's like one scene, and I'm like, well, we're doing this now? What the hell? You got a goddamn vampire running around, these people are banging each other's sisters, man. It's like, and the orderly are raping the patients. It's like, oh, good lord, what kind of madhouse is this, man? Jeez Louise, man, it's wild as all hell. The editing on this too is peculiar, because at times it's edited very well, and at times it's not. The editing early on is pretty solid. There's a great part where you have Paul Thomas playing on the piano to, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and he's going back and forth between that and another sex scene, and that cut is done well, but with this version, because this version, Dracula Sucks, has less hardcore sex than the Lust at First Bite cut, the way they edit around it is incredibly awkward, to the point where for the first half that I'm watching this, I was sitting there going, am I watching a different version of this? Because they're intentionally cutting around a lot of this, because even when you have the assault sequence with John Holmes, it's very quick. There's really no nudity there, so then when it's over, it's like, what's going on here? But then, not to jump ahead, but when you get to the Lust at First Bite version, those sequences are played out in their entirety. So you have the full assault sequence, you have more sex sequences, and you're just like, okay, it feels kind of like they wanted to have a mix of both, because I thought at first, I was like, okay, maybe this is a more commercial version from the market, or maybe it's a softcore version. But then I'm thinking, well, no, it can't be a softcore version, because there is some not quite a finishing shot, but there is some residue, if you know what I mean, and I think you do. But then later on, when there is hardcore sex, it's like, okay, so now we're doing this, man. It doesn't totally gel for me, and it doesn't feel like a natural kind of build up where now we're going to be having, like, early on more maybe lighter kind of softer stuff, and then as we go on, be like, okay, maybe these characters are transforming, they're becoming more aggressive, the sex becomes more out there and all that. It's a weird kind of balance that doesn't, if you were going to watch this to look for the sex in it, I think you would be disappointed. I think you'd be better off watching the Lust at First Bite version of the film. Because even still, when you have some of the sex in this, I mean, there's not a lot of money shots in this, which is interesting for a film like this, because when you have all of these performers, when you have such a cast like this, it's almost like, why wouldn't you include the shots unless there was a specific artistic reason? And what that reason is, I really don't know. But it's bizarre, because when it first happened, when we see the finishing of a different scene that looked like it just happened, it's like, okay, well, maybe they didn't want to do it here, or maybe they didn't, whatever, maybe they wanted to cut that out. But then later on, when it's in the middle of a scene and then you cut, it's like, oh, so we're just gonna be cutting away now. It's a very strange kind of choice to do there, in terms of this version of the film. Because then, like, even earlier on in the film, when you have Dracula, who goes after, I think it was Lucy. It's funny, because even in Dracula, the actual story, I always would get the characters mixed up, besides Jonathan Harker. I'd always get Lucy and Mina mixed up, and especially if you watch that Cinemassacre video, that when they actually start changing characters' roles, it sort of starts to throw everything in the mix. But when there's a scene early on when Dracula, he takes over, he attacks Lucy, or, I'm sorry, he attacks... it is Lucy. He attacks Lucy in the bathroom, and there's a cut, and it's like, and then but Jamie Gillis is like a boner for, like, no reason. I'm like, there wasn't like a sex scene there. He's just like had it out. I'm like, what the hell is going on here, man? That can't be good, Drac. You can't be running around with that. And then someone's gonna be like, what the hell? Besides this vampire running around, this dude's running around naked. It's wild as all hell, man. And also, I did find funny that in one of the sequences with Paul Thomas, that he's having sex, and you can just see that there's not any contact being made. I don't want to get into specifics to be vulgar, but you can see, if you look, I mean, you watch this on 4K, man, it's sort of like there's just some things that maybe were not meant to be seen, but you can see he's not making contact with one of the actresses, man. It looks wild, but it's all, these are just little things. They don't actually take away from any kind of detrimental aspect of the film. These are merely just observations, above all else. It's filmed well for the most part. I mean, this was filmed in Panavision 35mm, and it looks good, although there are a couple times where it does kind of succumb to some of the usual trappings of adult films, where you get some awkward kind of handheld work that doesn't really fit. And then there's one scene in the film that I thought was very bizarre that they didn't do a second take of, that you have John Holmes and Richard Bulik on a bed together, Renfield. And Renfield is in the background, and he's almost completely out of focus. I mean, he looks, like, off. And I thought maybe there's an artistic reason behind it. But then John gets up, and Renfield is still out of focus, but he's like the only one in the scene. It's like, well, what's going on here, man? So, but for the most part, it is shot well. Those underground sequences all look really exceptional. There's one part in this that I thought was very, very cool. What looked to be like later kind of like video effects, where you would have these. You'd have the footage, you have like this red kind of coloring over it. I really can't. I don't even know how to describe it. It reminded me of, like, and this is kind of a bizarre reference, but if any of you have seen the kind of infamous SOV film Tales from the Quad Ed Zone, there's just some parts in that where the video effects are, like, out of control. It's wild as all hell, man. And it was reminding me, I watched this, I'm like, damn, man, this is the first time I've thought about Tales from the Quad Ed Zone in God knows how long. I mean, it's wild as hell, but it's cool. They only do it once. They don't overdo it. But it does look cool, man, and it is cool. And also, I wanted to say earlier the scene. I was trying to get my notes together, but it was Mike Ranger and Serena who were who were the at first when they were cutting back, it was them who seemingly had sex, but then they cut and it's like what's going on? So I forgot to list their names down here, but there is that. And when it comes to the writing as well. What I was saying before with the tone is that some of the dialogue, it bounces between being very comical and very silly to being more straightforward in a way where it's not consistently funny, but it's more kind of amusing at times. Renfield has a line that's 80 yard where he says something like Lucy is the slut, Harker is the homo, Mina is the virgin, like me. It's very, very bizarre dialogue, but it's amusing in its own right. I mean, as it's going along, I mean, the plot of this is, I would say it's nonsense, but it's really not, because that's kind of an exaggerated thing to say. But because it is based off a previous material, that there is some connection there. But there were times where characters would really just kind of wander in and out of the film. I wasn't really sure what was kind of connecting it all. There were times where, I mean, even though I was sitting there enjoying it, I'm like, I don't even know where these characters went. I don't know what these characters are doing here. It all becomes kind of muddled. And then when you get to the third act, where it's like, now I guess we're going after Dracula, but they're not really taking it seriously. It's very nonchalant, very strange. But then it's funny enough, actually, speaking of with the 1931 film, so they tried to recreate the famous scene in Dracula where you have Dracula throwing Renfield. I can't remember if it was down the flight of stairs or it was over the flight of stairs, but they didn't have the room for that here, so it's funny because you have Jamie Gillis who goes to do the same thing to Richard Bulik, but he more kind of like pushes him to the side of like this like little like grassy kind of hill, and he kind of just like walks off camera, and you're like, all right, man, I guess he's dead. It's like he just kind of walks out of frame. He's like, no, Dracula, don't do it. And then he's like, all right, I guess he's out of the movie now. It's like, what the hell? Yeah, the ending of this is bizarre. It's like I think I don't know if they ran out of time or what, but they get to the end of the film and they go to, I mean, I guess spoilers, if you don't want to know how it ends. But they go to kill Dracula. They open the door, they let the sunlight in, and nothing really happens. He kind of just falls. I forgot who was even in that last scene. I didn't make a note of that. I apologize. But he falls on top of another woman. I forgot who that was. I apologize. And then it's kind of it. He doesn't burn up. He doesn't do anything. I'm not expecting like a big kind of spectacle death scene, but it was just very funny how, they die, they shut the door, and then bam, it's over. Go home. Okay, what happened here? What are we doing? Nothing's really resolved at that front. So Dracula Sucks. It's an interesting. I think the technical aspects and the filming itself, I think, kind of overshadows maybe the quality of the film stuff. It's definitely it's a good film. I will say that it is. I'm maybe not quite as high on it as maybe saying it's one of the best from this era. I think it's more kind of just a situation where you had a lot of really good actors. It's shot very well in a great location. There's a lot of really good things about it, but the film itself, it's not one I really need to revisit. It is good, though. I do like it. Now, for the Lust at First Bite version, I won't go on too long about this because a lot of the same points do kind of remain, but this is really a different version of the film, for better or for worse. Now, this one is shorter. Like I said before, it's an hour, 14 minutes, and the narrative of this one I find to be far, I won't say incoherent, but it's pretty close to it, because you have certain plot points that are the same. You have people. Yeah, you have people arriving. You have Dracula hanging out. I mean, that's fine and good. But then there are a lot of scenes that are done in different order, and in a different order that doesn't really make sense to the narrative. So you'll have Renfield, who is in the institution, and he's being looked at. He's strapped to the bed, and then a couple scenes later, he's now outside the institution. He's going up the stairs, and he's like, "What's going on here? How's the outside? What are we doing here, man?" I don't remember them. I don't remember using this as much in the Dracula Sucks version, but they reused the shot of Jamie Gillis standing outside the doorway. They used that shot, I swear to God, like 4 or 5 times. I'm like, what is going on here? And interestingly enough, as well, kind of on topic, off topic, but Seka is credited top billing in this one. I don't know why she's specifically top billed. It's not in alphabetical order. It's bizarre. I mean, there's ADR over the new there's new ADR over the dialogue on this, so you'll have some of the shots where no one's talking, including the scene with John Holmes and Irene Best. That's all ADR because you never see their mouths moving. And with that, all the sex is played out in its entirety. This feels more kind of what you would expect from this. I mean, Gillis' introduction in this is non-existent. He really is just there. There is no introduction. The first scene is just him as Dracula. Okay, he's Dracula here. All right, what are we doing now? And you had that a little bit in the Dracula Sucks version where you have the title card on that, but it went away and then came back to it in a way that worked, and I thought really kind of built him up well for Dracula. Here you have a whole sex scene, but he's just so happened to be Dracula. It's like it could have been dressed as the dude down the street, man. It's wild. There's more sex in this. There is some. I think there's actually some sex that wasn't even in the Dracula Sucks version. Interestingly enough, there still isn't a money shot in the Jamie Gillis part early on. Although I don't remember if that was in the Dracula Sucks version or not. I don't know. But that, like I said before, that scene with Irene Best and John Holmes, man, I tell you, they were looping that ADR because Irene Best was doing this moan that I swear to God, man, it was like the same. It was like the same 5-second audio. They just kept looping and looping, and that scene goes on for a while. So it's like, you know, I didn't even register it at first, but I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, I feel like I've been watching this scene for an hour. What is going on here with this, man? It's bizarre. The ending of this version is completely different in so that they really don't resolve anything. I mean, Jonathan Harker really is kind of, I don't know what happened to him. He's there with Van Helsing. I should say Reggie Nalder plays Van Helsing as well, who apparently was, I don't know if he was embarrassed or was ashamed to be in this. I only read a little bit of that, but he's been in more kind of traditional sort of theatrical films. Actually, funnily enough, he was also in Dracula's Dog from 1977, also known as, I think it was Zoltan or not Zoltar, like from Big. Well, actually, Dracula's Dog is actually a pretty fun movie. I would recommend that. But, Reggie Nalder's been in stuff like, credited. I don't remember him from all these, but, like, The Man Who Knew Too Much. He's had, like, uncredited roles in, like, The Manchurian Candidate, The Bird of the Crystal Plumage. He was in Mark of the Devil. So he's done quote-unquote legitimate films. He was uncredited in Salem's Lot. But he was also in Blue Ice in 85, which was also was also directed by Phillip Marshak, so I really don't know what that's about, unless he regretted it later, not in between. But even though the ending is different and they absolutely resolve nothing, like the final shot of this is like amazing. It's almost like I can't believe they didn't include that in the Dracula Sucks version, because it's just, I don't want to give it away, but just the colors on it, the shot composition, it's all just top notch. It's a brilliant shot to end on. It's completely just great. So yeah, I mean, with that said, it's an important film of this era. You have these great sets, you have this great cast. Everyone is good. The film. It's just that the film itself, I just wish could have been better. I do like it. I don't think that the Lust at First Bite version is that much worse than the Dracula Sucks version, but I do think it is a step down. If you're looking for more just hardcore sex, then I think you're going to be better off. Actually, no, I'm sorry, you are going to be better off with the Lust at First Bite cut of the film. If you're looking for an interesting kind of look into these actors at this time, stronger actors than they are sex performers, then I think you'd be better off with the Dracula Sucks version. Or if you just want that, then presumably the R-rated version of the film as well, which is also not on the 4K. Blu-ray. Apparently, it's not on the DVD as well, so you'll have to kind of look elsewhere for that. But Dracula Sucks. It's a notable film. I'd recommend it. There's more good than bad. It has its detriments, but overall, I think this is an essential film to watch from this period. Even if it's not one, that's one of my favorites. But yeah, man. So that's gonna be Dracula Sucks, aka Lust at First Bite. I keep saying that name wrong. Thank you guys for, if you've made it this far, for listening. It's really cool of you. I really appreciate it, and I hope you've enjoyed this. So until next time, thank you for listening.